Good morning. It's a beautiful morning, isn't it? I woke up this morning and the sun's like streaming through the windows. Like, oh, thank you, Lord, for a beautiful day. It's almost a bit too beautiful because I'm being blinded a little bit from the side. So I'm Sim, and I'm actually really excited to be bringing the final preach in our series that we've been doing in the Book of Esther. And we're looking at the final 2 chapters today. But no worries, if you've missed any of the ones in between, we'll do a nice roundup, and hopefully you won't have missed anything. So we've got Esther. We've got this really young, beautiful woman who's been married to the king, Xerxes. We've got Haman, who's the evil enemy of the Jews, who managed to persuade King Xerxes to make a law, which is called an edict, which meant the Jews everywhere were going to be killed on a specific day. But in a wonderfully, it's dark, comedic reversal, the tables were turned on Haman, the enemy, and he's killed as a victim of his own scheme. Esther and her cousin Mordecai, who's been really important, they can't undo the law that Haman made, but they've now managed to make a new law, a second edict, which allows the Jews to defend themselves, which leads to much celebration. There's this new law. There's a day of life is coming. There's joy. There's feasting. And you can imagine, we finished chapter 8, you can imagine if this was a film, I think the credits might start rolling. There's celebrating going on. It's pretty much over. It's pretty much finished. Haman has been dead for quite a long time now, relatively. Aren't we done? Haven't the Jews won? Well, not quite yet. And in fact, the point that we're in now, end of chapter 8, we've got 2 more chapters to go, it really makes me think of one of my favorite films of all time, Monsters vs. Aliens. Has anybody seen Monsters vs. Aliens, 2009? Quite a few. Yes, Ben at the back, love that. If you haven't seen it, you should go and watch it, it's a great film. But we're rooting for the monsters. And in one of the final scenes, they're chasing this evil alien around his spaceship that's about to self-destruct. It's very dramatic. They finally catch him, and Susan, who's a giant lady monster, she's got him at gunpoint, the evil alien, and she says, "Open the doors." Let's go, undo the evil you've done. Seems like it's over. But he turns around and says, "Well, even if I wanted to, I couldn't. That's what happens when you set the ship to self-destruct." In other words, there's something that's happened, something that's been put in motion that can't be undone. He can't stop it. Just like there's this law that's been put in motion that can't be stopped. Esther and Mordecai can't just undo the evil law that Haman made. And it seems a bit stupid, doesn't it, to have a self-destruct function on a ship that you can't override. That was a bad idea. Who did that? Just like it seems a bit silly that King Xerxes thinks that it's a good idea to run his kingdom through laws that can't be undone. That's a bad idea. And the more I was thinking about this, Susan in this film, who has a really terrible time becoming a giant, and she's locked away with other monsters, but eventually she comes to terms with who she is and where she's been placed, and she resolves to do all she can to save humanity, which sounds quite a lot like the story that we've been reading in Esther. And maybe if you know the film, you think I'm stretching it a little bit. But I was surprised at the similarities between the 2 storylines. And so that's where we're at in the Book of Esther. Esther and Mordecai have put a new law, a new edict in place, which allows the Jews to defend themselves. And Haman's old edict can't be undone, it's still in motion, but this is where we're at. So open your Bibles if you've got them with you. We're reading in Esther chapter 9, starting verse 1, and we're going to read to verse 19 to begin with. It's Esther chapter 9, verse 1 to 19. The words will be on the screen as well. So on the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, the edict commanded by the king was to be carried out. On this day, the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, but now the tables were turned, and the Jews got the upper hand over those who hated them. The Jews assembled in their cities in all the provinces of King Xerxes to attack those determined to destroy them. No one could stand against them, because the people of all the other nations were afraid of them, and all the nobles of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and the king's administrators helped the Jews, because fear of Mordecai had seized them. Mordecai was prominent in the palace, his reputation spread throughout the provinces, and he became more and more powerful. The Jews struck down all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying them. They did what they pleased to those who hated them. In the citadel of Susa, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. They also killed Parshandatha, Dalphon, Asphatha, Paratha, Adalia, Aridatha, Parmashtha, Arasai, Aradai, and Vizatha, the 10 sons of Haman, son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews. But they did not lay their hands on the plunder. The number of those killed in the citadel of Susa was reported to the king that same day. The king said to Esther, "The Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men and the 10 sons of Haman in the citadel of Susa. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? It will also be granted." "If it pleases the king," Esther answered, "give the Jews in Susa permission to carry out this day's edict tomorrow also, and let Haman's 10 sons be impaled on poles." So the king commanded that this be done. An edict was issued in Susa, and they impaled the 10 sons of Haman. The Jews in Susa came together on the 14th day of the month of Adar, and they put to death in Susa 300 men, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. Meanwhile, the remainder of the Jews who were in the king's provinces also assembled to protect themselves and get relief from their enemies. They killed 75,000 of them, but did not lay their hands on the plunder. This happened on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th day they rested and made it a day of feasting and joy. The Jews in Susa, however, had assembled on the 13th and 14th, and then on the 15th they rested and made it a day of feasting and joy. That is why rural Jews, those living in villages, observe the 14th of the month of Adar as a day of joy and feasting, a day for giving presents to each other. The victory's won. The Jews have triumphed over their enemies. They've slaughtered all who planned to do them harm. The day that Haman planned for their destruction has been utterly transformed into the day of their deliverance, a day of life, a day of joy. And perhaps you've read some of the other battle stories in the Old Testament. Perhaps you've still got passages from Judges ringing in your ears from the series we did over the summer. In which case, I think it probably stands out at this point that God is still not mentioned. He's still not mentioned. This whole book, this whole series we've been doing, God has not been mentioned in the Book of Esther this whole time. And this is the Bible. I'm reading this, and I'm expecting something like to the effect of, "And the Lord gave them victory over their enemies," or like, "And the Lord delivered them," or like in the spirit of Judges, like, "The Spirit of the Lord came upon Esther, and she wielded a cat's leg and killed 75,000 enemies." Something weird, that like the Lord giving them victory over people. But God's name has just been completely absent, utterly absent. And what does that mean? I think we've been unpacking over this series, but it's an invitation, I think. It's an invitation for us to look for where God is at work. The author of the Book of Esther is saying, like, come on now, you can do some of the work. Have a look. I'm not going to mention it, but have a look. Where can you see God at work? And the beautiful thing, which I hope that you've also been realizing as we've gone through this book, is that God is everywhere. He's behind every line. He's so clearly working behind the scenes, and God is so clearly in control of absolutely everything that's going on. We look back and we see everything from Queen Vashti refusing to come out, Esther being chosen, Mordecai saves the king's life, but it goes unnoticed. The king has a sleepless night at the right time. He chooses to read the right thing. He happens to realize he hasn't rewarded Mordecai for saving his life. Haman happens to be nearby, meaning that Mordecai and Esther happen to be in the right place to put in motion a plan that will prevent the death of their entire people. I mean, we look back and go, wow, like how many divine coincidences was that? How did I ever doubt the ending of this story? We look back and like, God was there the whole time. How did I not see that God's hand was behind every move that was being made? God was working, even when on the surface, it didn't look like it. And so I want to encourage you this morning that God is at work. Whether you can see his work in your life really clearly right now or not, God is at work. Whether you can feel his presence in this very moment or not, God is at work. Whether you can see his fingerprints exactly on what's going on in your life, or if you can't, use it as an invitation to look, because God is at work. Maybe to you, like to me actually, when we're just reading that, the slaughter of more than 75,000 Persians seems like quite a lot. It's quite a lot of people to die in one time. It seems quite intense. And if that's something that like troubles you, as it does me, I'd love to talk to you more about it afterwards. But I've got a few thoughts this morning to help us think about it. And the first one is that it's really, really clear that the Jews here are acting in self-defense. That Mordecai and Esther's new law, the new edict issued in chapter 8, granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and to protect themselves, to destroy, kill, and annihilate the armed men of any nationality or province who might attack them. So many times it mentions that they're only doing this to those who hate them. And looking at the dates that we know in the Book of Esther, it's been about 8 months since this new edict has been given. So we've seen lots of people actually side with the Jews already. They've been like, no, I'm going to ignore the first edict. Haman's dead. He made that. That's long gone. We're going to side with the Jews, side with the new edict. And most of the political leaders were told they were afraid of Mordecai. And so these people that are coming against the Jews on this specific day are the ones who are really out to get them. They're the people who very clearly and deliberately chosen a side. These are enemies that are killed in self-defense. And the fact that it's repeated again and again that the Jews took no plunder, is mentioned 3 times if you noticed, emphasizes that this is not like a bloodlust-fueled, greedy rampage, which would have been normal in political conflicts at the time, but these are people who've gathered to defend themselves. And secondly, another thought to help us think about this, I think as we're invited to see God at work behind the scenes of this story, we're also invited to see the work of Satan at the same time. And so I think we're invited to see this battle as a holy war. This is a great eternal battle between God's people and the seed of Satan. In Genesis 3, in the first book of the Bible, when Adam and Eve sin for the very first time, creation becomes broken. Our relationship with God is fractured. Our relationships with each other, fractured. Our relationship to the very earth that we live on, fractured. And God says to the serpent that I will put enmity between your offspring and the woman's. You're going to fight. This is the battle that's going on behind the scenes. And so when we read that they specifically kill the 10 sons of Haman, and Esther asks for another day in Susa to defend themselves, this is not Esther getting all like happy about killing people. Like, oh yeah, let's go again. Let's do some more. This is Esther asking to finish the job, to take out evil from the root as an act of holy war. So the battle is over. The victory is won. God has been working behind the scenes, and the Jews are now starting their feasting and their celebration. They're celebrating the victory. And so let's read on from verse 20, Esther chapter 9, from verse 20. Mordecai recorded these events, and he sent letters to all the Jews throughout the provinces of King Xerxes, near and far, to have them celebrate annually the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar, as the time when the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month when their sorrow was turned to joy, and their mourning into a day of celebration. He wrote them to observe the days as days of feasting and joy, and giving presents of food to one another and gifts to the poor. So the Jews agreed to continue the celebration they had begun, doing what Mordecai had written to them. For Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast the poor, that is, the lot, or the dice, for their ruin and destruction. But when the plot came to the king's attention, he issued written orders, that the evil scheme Haman had devised against the Jews should come back onto his own head, and that he and his sons should be impaled on poles. Therefore, these days were called Purim, from the word poor. Because of everything that is written in this letter, and because of what they had seen and what had happened to them, the Jews took it on themselves to establish the custom that they and their descendants and all who joined them should without fail observe these 2 days every year in the way prescribed and at the time appointed. These days should be remembered and observed in every generation by every family, in every province, and in every city. And these days of Purim should never fail to be celebrated by the Jews, nor should the memory of these days die out among their descendants. And the next few verses here outline Esther putting her own queenly authority behind Mordecai's establishing of the festival. So we've got a good chunk here of what feels a little bit like epilogue, and we thought the book could have ended a little while ago, but it's highlighting the need to celebrate the victory. Celebrate the victory. Remember the victory. Do not let yourselves forget what happened. Do not forget that a great victory has been won. And this is so important because how often do we forget things? How often do we forget things? How easily do we forget? I'm pretty sure you'll be able to bring to mind some things that you've forgotten recently. And if you can't, you might have a bigger problem than I can help you with today. Maybe your keys, your wallet, birthday, anniversaries, that's a big one. I've been told lots of stories of people forgetting their own children places. Does anyone own up to have done that this morning? Like personally, I'll literally like wake up and I'll make a mental note of the things, I've got a checklist of things I need to bring for the day. And I'll still leave the house without my lunch or without something that I need. We're forgetful people. All of us are. Well, except Nay. My wife seems to never forget anything. But everybody else is a forgetful person. And it's a human thing. It's a human thing to forget. And we see it reflected in the Bible. We've got all these stories of the Israelites wandering around in the desert because they forgot what God had done for them. They forgot that God had brought them out of slavery in Egypt. And that's precisely when things started to go wrong, because they forgot. And so I think here we see real wisdom from Mordecai writing everything down. He sends letters to absolutely everyone. Celebrate the victory. Every year, remember what happened here. Do not forget. And it's worked, because even today, Jews still celebrate the festival of Purim. Thousands of years later, still celebrating it. Purim, that's the name of the festival from the Hebrew word pur, which it explains. It means lots or dice, which was how Haman originally chose the specific day that he was going to kill all the Jews. He cast lots, rolled the dice. And this allusion to chance is again, I think, just playing into the irony that we see at the heart of this whole book, inviting us to see God's presence through his absence. Looks like it's chance, but actually we know that God is working behind the scenes. Proverbs 16:33 says, "We may throw the dice, but it is the Lord who determines how they fall." We may throw the dice, but the Lord determines how they fall. Something that seemed like a random evil was not outside of God's sight. It was not outside of his plan. It was not outside of his capacity to redeem. And so this morning, I want to encourage you to celebrate victories. Remember them. Celebrate your victories. Think, what's something that God has done for you recently? Past couple of weeks, days, years, pick a time frame. What's something that God has done for you? What is something that you remember, you were so worried about, but God has given you peace about that now? What's something that brought you to your knees, but now you're standing again? What was a mountain that looked insurmountable in your life? Something that you thought that you couldn't overcome, but God has brought you over it. What's your own testimony? How has God shown himself to you? How has God rescued you from where you were? And how do you remember those things? How do you make sure that you don't forget them? If we were establishing festivals for everything that God did in each and every one of our lives, I'm really pleased to say that we would be partying non-stop, wouldn't we? And maybe that's a bit what heaven's going to be like. I don't know. Maybe we should talk to Jamie about it, establishing some more some more parties. But personally, how do you celebrate? How do you remember what God has done for you? Do you write things down? Mordecai wrote things down, sent it around. I would encourage you to write things down. Maybe you can keep a list. Maybe you could create a little bank of voice notes on your phone if you prefer speaking. You could have a little victory voice note section so you don't forget. Why don't you try telling somebody else about it? Why don't you allow an opportunity to celebrate together? It doesn't have to be awkward. It doesn't have to be Sim told me I had to mention something in conversation that God's done for me. And you just start sweating about it. How about how you're going to shoehorn it into a conversation with some poor, unsuspecting individual? But maybe next time somebody asks you how you are, why not, instead of saying, yeah, I'm all right, I'm busy, I'm really tired actually, things that I always say, why don't you say something like, I'm doing really well. I've been grateful actually, so grateful recently for something. How's your week been? You know what? I've been worrying about this thing so much, but this week, God did this. Why don't you use those questions as invitations to celebrate with each other? And if you've been sat here thinking this whole time, I'm actually not really there yet, I don't even know what I think about all this God stuff, and so I definitely don't have any examples of what God's done for me, that's totally fine. That's not something to worry about. But if you're curious about what we're talking about and what people are like nodding about beside you, why don't you ask someone? Because I'm convinced that wherever you're sat in this building today, there'll be somebody within about a meter of you who would love to talk to you about things that they've seen God do for them in their lives. Why don't we create a culture of celebration? A culture of celebrating the victories that God brings in our lives, because celebration strengthens faith. Celebration strengthens faith. It is through remembering what God has done in the past that we strengthen our hope for what he will do in the future. I know that God has brought victory and he'll do so again. Celebration strengthens our faith. Why don't we try and create a culture of celebration, remembering what he's done for us? And I think establishing this festival of Purim is a great example that we should be celebrating victories that God brings in our lives. But I think even deeper than that, the victory that this victory in Esther is really pointing towards is the victory. This victory in Esther is an image of the victory that is worth celebrating, that's really worth celebrating. And that's Christ's victory on the cross, the ultimate symbol of victory, the ultimate great reversal. Because on that cross, the ultimate symbol of God's judgment, Christ triumphed over death. The day of death became the day of life. The day of darkness became the day of greatest light. Mourning and distress were turned into rejoicing and hope. The very day that Satan intended for evil, God used to bring the greatest good there's ever been. The day that made it look like all hope was lost became the day that true hope was really born. And we're thinking back to Genesis 3, which I've already mentioned. Like Satan, the serpent, may have bitten Christ's heel, but we can praise the Lord that Christ has crushed his head. Do we not have reason to celebrate? We have reason to celebrate. It's repeated in this chapter that the Jews celebrated this victory as a time when they got relief from their enemies. I don't know if anyone noticed that word, relief or rest. And I think it's really important because Jesus' victory, the ultimate victory, also means relief. It means rest from your enemies. Jesus' victory means rest. Maybe you're thinking, I'm actually all right, thanks, I slept 10 hours last night. In which case, I'm very jealous. Or maybe you're a parent who was up 7 times last night, and rest sounds like something you could really get behind celebrating. But this was not the Jewish people celebrating a chance to have a nap. This relief, this rest, is such a deep, rich, theological theme in the Bible. God has to give the people relief from their enemies before they can build the temple. This rest is the symbol that the conquest under Joshua is complete. It's rest. Rest is what God promises David when he establishes his kingdom, rest from his enemies. Jesus says, like we've already heard this morning, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden. I will give you rest. You'll find rest for your souls. And so this rest that we're talking about is peace from your enemies, but in a really deep spiritual sense. So I want to ask this morning, are you tired? Not have you had enough sleep, but are you tired? Are you tired of finding yourself in the same situations with the same people doing things that you know you shouldn't be doing? Are you tired of giving into temptation and watching things that you told yourself you weren't going to? Are you tired of finding yourself feeling so much anger when your child does that thing again and again? Are you tired of not being the wife that you want to be or the husband that you know you should be? Are you tired of being selfish, of just finding yourself thinking about what you want all the time? Are you tired of looking at the world with jaded eyes and just sucking the joy out of everything? Are you tired of feeling condemned? Are you tired of feeling like no matter what you do, no matter how hard you try, nothing you ever give is good enough? Are you tired? Do you ache and do you groan to be free? Because Christ came so that you might have relief from your enemies. that you might be set free. For we know that there is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. You can point to the cross, and you can say, the grave has no claim on me, for Christ is the victory. Is that not worth celebrating? Let's read the final few verses of this whole book, which are in chapter 10. It's a really short chapter, like 3 verses long. It's tiny. But let's read chapter 10. King Xerxes imposed tribute throughout the empire to its distant shores, and all his acts of power and might, together with a full account of the greatness of Mordecai, whom the king had promoted. Are they not written in the book of the annals of the king of Media and Persia? Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Xerxes, preeminent among the Jews, and held in high esteem by his many fellow Jews, because he worked for the good of his people and spoke up for the welfare of all the Jews. Now, you might not have noticed it actually, but these verses are quite a bittersweet ending to the story. It's talking about the greatness of Xerxes and the greatness of Mordecai, but look back at that first verse. King Xerxes imposed a tribute throughout the empire to its distant shores. Taxes. What a great way to end the story. After the drama of the story, the fire that Esther and the Jews have been through, they've been saved, and the tables have been so dramatically turned on their enemies, taxes are just like such a, like back to reality. Life's still here. Because they've got relief from their enemies, they've got rest, but they're still living in exile. They're still living in Persia under King Xerxes, who we've realized, I think, over the course of this, he's a bit of a drunken lunatic of a ruler. He's not someone that you really want to be led by. And there's this tension here, isn't there? We've had this victory, we've had this realization in part, but it's not full, because they're still living in exile. If we could get the band back up, please, actually, Jack, that'd be great. But this ending to the book, this like tension between there's a victory but we're still in exile, I think is again an image of the Christian life. Because the victory has been won. I've talked about it already. Christ has died and is risen, as was prophesied, and there is now no condemnation for those who put their trust in him. The victory is won. The holy war has been won. And yet here we are, still living in exile. Still living in a world that isn't our home, among people and under rulers who don't know Christ. Who can be and are used by God. God is at work. We've seen that in this story. But I think you'll probably agree that we're a way off the Lord, may it be on earth as it is in heaven that we pray, aren't we? We exist in that tension between the now and the not yet. And so what do? I think we look for God working behind the scenes. And when we can't see him, we use that as an invitation to look harder because he is working. We celebrate the victories, and we celebrate the victory of Christ, which brings us true rest from our enemies. And we celebrate it because celebration strengthens faith. And as we celebrate, we confidently look to the day when he will wipe every tear from every eye. There'll be no more death, no more mourning, no more crying, no more pain, for the old order of things will have passed away.